If I go. Oh, oh. Really?
Well, no, it's.
Yeah.
Don't wear. Hardly go. Since we know. Everything.
I
2. And thank you for putting this together. Sorry, I was a little bit late in joining. My passwords had all expired, so good to see you, Secretary Buchanan. I have in the room here Auditor Racinas and Superintendent Schrader. I believe that gives us a quorum. I think you had told me that the treasurer had been here, was going to go back, get something and come back. So,
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
well, why don't we begin with no objection? Hearing none?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, just to recap where we are, today's meeting was noticed as a second special meeting of the State Loan and Investment Board as an authorizer of charter schools under Wyoming Statute 21-3-302.1 to consider 3 applications for charter contract. The board's procedure for evaluating the applications will be in accordance with the board's charter school policy and procedures effective July 13th of 2022. Those have been posted on the OSLI website. At the first special meeting, which was conducted on September 6th, the board was able to hear presentations from and conduct the required interviews for 2 of the charter school applicants, which are listed as J1 and J2. The Prairie View Community School, which plans to operate in Chugwater, Wyoming in the fall of 2023, and the Wyoming Classical Academy, which plans to operate in Mills starting in the fall of 2023. Public comment was also received by the board regarding these 2 applications on September 6th. At the meeting today, the board will hear the presentation from and conduct the interview for the Cheyenne Classical Academy, which submitted its application on July 20th, 2022. The school plans to operate in Cheyenne starting in the fall of 2023. It's expected that upon the conclusion of the Classical Academy presentation and interview, the board will again take public comment, ask any additional questions it may have, and then deliberate concerning all 3 applications and make its determination whether the board will grant a charter contract to the applicants for a period of 5 years pursuant to Wyoming Statute 21-3-309. So with that, Mr. Chairman, the Deputy Superintendent, Mr. Chad Auer, is here, and I would yield the floor to him.
Madam Director, just for the record, note that the treasurer has joined us. So thank you. Deputy Superintendent.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you and members of the board for the opportunity to be here today. For the record, my name is Chad Auer. I'm serving as Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction here in Wyoming. Before we get started, wanted to clarify or reiterate a couple of points that I think are important, that the Department of Education, once we received these applications, we worked to process them in a timely fashion with objectivity and transparency so that you folks would have the information that you need as quickly and as expediently as possible, which leads us to the last meeting, but also to today. As Director mentioned, we have one final applicant to consider for you to hear from, which is the most important part of this process, to hear from the applicant as well as for you to engage with interested stakeholders. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to introduce the 3rd and final applicant, Cheyenne Classical Academy. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the 3rd and final applicant is Cheyenne Classical Academy. This proposed school would be located in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Upon the review of WDE staff, we find this application is complete and ready for your consideration. I believe the applicant is here to make a presentation to you, and I'd invite them up here, and I will yield to the applicant.
Well, welcome again, and I just thank you, Representative Olson and Mr. Winters, for giving us the opportunity to hear the full presentation without the break, and just thank you very much for your flexibility.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Governor and board. My name is Nathan Winters. I am the board chairman for the Cheyenne Classical Academy, and we're very thankful for the opportunity to present to you all and are aware of the hard work over the last couple of years just to get us to this point. And so we're very thankful for all of the players that have been involved With me is one of our board members, Representative Jared Olson, and the two of us will be presenting to you the remarkable school and the process that we came to as we worked toward this moment. And so we're going to introduce our chairman, or our board, and then give you a timeline of our efforts, and we'll lay out our particular curricular approach and then answer any questions you may have. So Governor, with your leave, I'd love to turn it over to Mr. Olson.
Sure, please, Representative Olson.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, please, do I have to ignite this?
Yeah. It's my first time. Mr. Chairman, if I may please give a few brief opening remarks before I begin. It's my hope that you today will see a presentation about why Wyoming, and more specifically Laramie County, will benefit from chartering Cheyenne Classical Academy. To that end, I would be remiss, Mr. Chairman, if I did not clarify this simple fact. I want to be very clear. Cheyenne Classical Academy supports our public schools. We will not disparage our partners who work to provide the greatest education we can for our children here in Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, the CCA board has nothing but good things to say about our traditional public schools and our partners. As you are aware, for example, my wife is a public school teacher. My children have attended public school in Wyoming, and I myself, Mr. Chairman, am a graduate of Evanston High School. Go Red Devils. I have placed in front of each of you, Mr. Chairman, letters of support from two current trustees serving on the Laramie County School District No. 1 board. And my hope, Mr. Chairman, is that by the time CCA opens its doors to children and parents here in Laramie County, that you will be hard pressed to find a single trustee of our local school board who is not as passionate about this school as we are. And with that, Mr. Chairman, what I would like to do is introduce our board. As you have information about our board in the application, but I do want to just take a brief moment to introduce the members of our founding board. To my right is, of course, Chairman Nathan Winters, who you know. Here today, I believe we also have our Vice Chairman, Mr. Bill McIlvaine, former Speaker of the House, former East High School teacher, and a founding director of a school in St. Petersburg, Russia. I do not see Dr. Bruce Perryman.
Yes, COVID.
I'm sorry. So Dr. Bruce Perryman is ill, but he is on our board, and he's a former college president and administrator. We have Secretary Dick Morrison. Dr. Diane Galloway, who could not be here today. She is a retired educator, Mr. Chairman, also an Evanston Red Devil. She was a middle and high school principal in Evanston, and she is the past director of the University of Wyoming Lab School. And then we have our treasurer, Nick Kemp, as well. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to turn over the presentation at this point to Nathan Winters, who's going to talk to you about the historical timeline of the founding of our school.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Yes, Governor. Shortly before the advent of COVID-19, two members of our board, Mr. McIlvaine and Dr. Perryman, had the opportunity to learn of the classical liberal arts school and how it could be introduced to Cheyenne. They reached out to me, and since that time, we've had the opportunity to build an extraordinary board, which you have just heard about. And once the board was in place, we set out to accomplish two things. First, to study the major liberal arts curricula from across the nation. And we did. We looked at a number of them. And secondly, we wanted to ensure that the underlying business structure necessary for any school to be the best, we wanted to make sure that long after we are all in our eternal resting places, that the school would be strong and thriving. And so we looked through several models of different charter schools. There were several great programs, but with them would mean that there would be less local control, which is something that we were very conscious of. And in the final analysis, we recognized the need to bring in an education service provider so that we could have the best back office management support while still maintaining local leadership of our school. And to that end, we partnered with a network of amazing friends. I had the opportunity to visit a number of charter schools in northern Colorado and learn from them. And because of that, we as a board sought out Academica and then introduced them also to the folks up in Casper, whom you've already heard from. Academica, as a matter of fact, helped prepare the application you see before you. In the end, we believe that we've hit on the best way to have the best liberal arts curricula we can find, and then build the best organization possible while ensuring that we have a Wyoming heart in our Cheyenne-led school. To carry all of that forward, it's important that the board remains very active in the leadership, but then also hire a principal, a person we're calling a headmaster, that is extraordinarily skilled. And we have been looking at a number of individuals, but we've hit upon an individual that is remarkable right now that we would be able to introduce at a later time. He's still in a process, but what we were looking for is someone who has charter school experience on the one hand, and then an understanding of classical education on the other. And so as we have worked with all of the folks throughout the region, pending your approval, we're ready to move forward with Cheyenne Classical Academy with the target date of August of 2023. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to turn it over, if I may, to continue our presentation to Mr. Olson. Oh, Mr. Chairman, I have been reminded by the remarkable Mr. Olson that I am going to talk to you about our curriculum. And with that, we're excited about it because we looked across the nation at different liberal arts backgrounds and systems, and a classical liberal arts education is a unique thing. It's very, very special. And so in our curriculum, in the content, we actually introduced the traditional works of literature and history and philosophy, and study those eternal, perennial truths of the human soul that's important for us as we navigate the world around us today. And at Cheyenne Classical Academy, one of the things that we do is in the 4th and 5th grade, we actually introduce Latin and Greek roots, the etymology of words, so that they can have a deeper understanding of things as they say them. So as we study out grammar and logic and rhetoric, what we're doing is teaching them what to say and how to read, and then with logic, how to instill what they're reading, how to actually lay them out in such a way that they are in the pursuit of the logos that the Greeks were pursuing. That word is the word for word in Greek, but it also is the root in English for the word logic. So we actually teach them how to use logic to make decisions, and then rhetoric, how to relay those things that they have learned and that they have reasoned, how to relay those to other people so that they can be a fully functioning person by the time they are done with an education. And so with all of that, we utilize the primary source documents. We literally introduce them. For instance, just this morning, it sounds nerdy, I'm sorry, but I was reading again Aristotle's Metaphysics. And one of the things that he lays out in the very first article there is he talks about how every human being has a desire to know. And that the reason why we like our senses, we love our senses, not just because of sensory perception, but because that is how we are introduced to the world around us. And we want to take that basic desire that a student has and enhance it and introduce them to the primary sources, to teach them how to actually study from those primary sources, to show them the Socratic method, how to actually build a dialectical model of a conversation in their own minds, so that they can explore and become the very best person they possibly can be, and then teach them how to properly reflect on the things that they've learned. And so that is the heart of why we have specifically sought out a liberal arts education. And so having looked at the different models, we actually then looked at Hillsdale directly, Hillsdale College, because they bring in a lot of those different elements in what's called the Barney Charter School Initiative through their 1776 curriculum. And so that classical liberal arts approach is what we were holding up first and foremost. And that's why we have settled on this. So as we then build on our grammar and logic and rhetoric, and then introduce, of course, in that process, in that spiraling model that the great professor, Dr. E.D. Hirsch, in his core knowledge model, someone that is a legend in all education across America today, Dr. Hirsch made the statement, schooling in a democracy is not just schooling, it is citizen making. And so as we build the grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and the arithmetic and geometry and all the different elements that's necessary to build this out, we teach the trivium at first and the quadrivium second. And so that builds a very specific kind of education. At this time now, Governor, I'd like to turn it back over. Oh, I'm sorry. We now have a methodology, our core knowledge sequence. I've already referenced our spiraling curriculum. But then in our literacy, we actually focus in on phonemic awareness and phonics and vocabulary. And underlying all of that is comprehension. It's not just enough to be able to properly enunciate things, but also to know what you are saying. We also build in Singapore math, and Singapore has been a world leader for student math achievement in 4th and 8th grade for years. And that's the reason why we have focused in on that. And I've already talked about the classics, learning Latin and learning Greek, the roots of the English language, and we specifically utilize Wheelock's Latin. So with that, we're focusing in on that curriculum so that we can really help children achieve their highest ends.
One thing, Mr. Chairman, that I want to just kind of build upon here is this core knowledge sequence and what it means, how is this different? And I think a lot of the things that, Nathan is talking about, I think we would all agree are taught within our schools. One of the things that makes the curriculum really unique is horizontal and vertical alignment. So the idea is not just how you teach and what you teach, but when you teach it. So horizontal alignment in a shared knowledge-based school means that you're aligning the curriculum across the subjects. And the purpose of that goes back to citizen making, because that if the students are aligned across the curriculum on the subjects, then when we go back to critical thinking, when we go back to the Socratic method, the students have the ability, they have the tools and the knowledge to actually have a dialogue with each other, because they're being taught the same information across the subjects. I've put on the screen here, Mr. Chairman, an example of horizontal alignment in our school, and the example would be the 5th grade Renaissance. So in social studies in 5th grade at this moment in time, the students would be studying maybe Machiavelli as an example and structure of government and philosophical thought behind that. While in science, at the same time, they may be looking at Galileo and the study of space. In art, they would be looking at Renaissance artists, Da Vinci, for example, which can also fold over into science as well. And then in English, they might, Mr. Chairman, study Shakespeare, a Renaissance writer. So this is just a really basic example of what, the core knowledge that's being taught, but also how it is sequenced horizontally aligned across the subjects. The last section we want to touch on just in our formal presentation here, Mr. Chairman, is why Laramie County needs this charter. More specifically, what makes CCA's charter so unique? And I want to have just a brief conversation, Mr. Chairman, about a very important existential question in education. And that question is, who is the client of education? Is it the state of Wyoming? How about our local school boards? What about education associations? I think with that list, Mr. Chairman, we can all agree that those folks are not the clients in education. They're partners in education, but they're not the clients. But let me ask you this. How about our students? Do you think that the students are the clients of Wyoming education? But I would submit to you, Mr. Chairman, that the client of education is actually the parents of Wyoming. And that's what makes Cheyenne Classical Academy, I think, very different, is that we approach philosophically the system that we have designed with that in mind. I think we all know the adage that the client is always right in business. And if the client here is parent, then we want a parent-focused school. The concept of parental choice should drive education, not just in Wyoming, but across the United States, because it is not a unique concept. What I'm not talking about is not novel, Mr. Chairman. It is deeply rooted in the history of the United States. So what are parents asking for? Well, they're asked for all kinds of different things, and we won't pretend that they only ask for our model. That's not what we're saying. But what we believe that parents are asking for is something very simple, and that's just choice. They have a fundamental right to make decisions about how and where their children are educated. It doesn't mean that one system is right or one system is wrong, or one curriculum is right or one is wrong. It's just that a parent should have a plethora of options to choose from when and where and how their children are educated. We talked first about how CCA will introduce a core knowledge-based curriculum. CCA will be the first and only school in Laramie County to use that curriculum. But again, that concept is not entirely novel to Wyoming. Snowy Range Academy in Albany County uses a core knowledge curriculum. So we know that it's been tried and tested and true here in our state. 35 years ago, Mr. Chairman, there were 0 core knowledge schools in the United States. And today there are over 5,000 of them. I highlight that point just on the point of choice and growth. And again, at CCA, of course, it is our preferred curriculum. And personally, I prefer the knowledge-based system for my own children, Mr. Chairman. But I'm not saying it's the only format for students to learn or the only curriculum for students to learn, but rather that parents should just simply have a choice in the curriculum their students are taught. I'm going to touch on a few other uniquenesses of Cheyenne Classical Academy, and Nathan highlighted some of these in his presentation, Latin, for example, being required by all of our students. Other nuances would be our culture, Mr. Chairman. CCA will foster a school culture of moral virtue, decorum, respect, discipline, and studiousness. We also believe strongly in local control. And Cheyenne Classical Academy will be governed by a local board with parents, non-parents, specialists, educators, administrators, very similar to the board that we've described to you already today, having a diverse knowledge base and experience that they bring to the table. They'll be making local choices about what works and what doesn't work based directly on parental input, involvement, and advocacy. Citizen making. We believe this makes Cheyenne Classical Academy very unique because we fundamentally believe that that is the role of the school, is to produce citizens. Because students at Cheyenne Classical Academy will be engaged to become productive, responsible citizens who enjoy lifelong learning and involvement in our community and in our republic. We also introduce a unique pedagogy, which Nathan talked about. We believe heavily and will use heavily the Socratic method. Why, Mr. Chairman? I believe Secretary Buchanan can relate to the Socratic method from his time in law school, but maybe not all of us are as familiar with it because it's moved away inside of our traditional schools in how we teach. The Socratic method, we believe, helps us design a system where we no longer teach children what to think, but we teach them how to think, Mr. Chairman. We push our teachers to use primary source instruction. Our students will actually prepare and defend a thesis publicly. And our curriculum will be unified, as I discussed earlier, not just horizontally aligned, but also vertically across grades. Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving us the opportunity to present this to you. We know that you have most of this in your, or all of this in your application, but we do appreciate your time. We know it's valuable and the opportunity to explain our school to you, and certainly welcome the opportunity, Mr. Chairman and board, to answer any questions you might have of us.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Winters and Representative Olson. Let me begin by asking if there are any questions. And I can see you, Secretary Buchanan. Are there any questions that you have?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A similar question that I asked of the other applicants with regards to, in general, the plans to accommodate children with special needs, special education, and those sorts of things would be the first question.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, that is a good question. And as you may have followed after your September 6th hearing. There was an education committee meeting dealing with this topic. So the uniqueness of IDEA is that it directly funds the federal dollars directly to the LEA, which in Wyoming is simply our school districts. So that means that we know and understand and very much appreciate that we are a public school open to all students in Laramie County and Wyoming. That means that we will not turn away any student for any reason. We have a lottery system, and that lottery system will only be utilized when our classrooms are too full, because we believe in small classrooms. That being said, under the existing law, we would be required, Mr. Secretary, to negotiate with our school district board regarding SPED funding, because it's not automatic to our school, and we understand that. We have not engaged in those negotiations yet because we felt that it would be presumptuous without a charter in front of us. Once we have a charter, we believe that will be our very next step, is to begin working more closely with our partners, the school district. My hope, however, Mr. Secretary, in my reference to the Education Committee, is that maybe there needs to be a change to the law. I don't know if that's an independent LEA and the school, a public charter school becomes an independent LEA on its own. I don't know. The committee will figure that out, but it's fundamentally it's a funding issue, because if we invite in a child with special needs, educational needs, let's just pick speech as an example, and the child needs a speech pathologist to master certain letters in our school, then the dollar amount of the cost of that service is simple. It is what it is. It is exactly what it costs. So I'm not sure how we negotiate that with the school district, because if they fundamentally believe in the education of our students, the dollars should flow directly to our school, as they are public students. However, I understand the law doesn't obligate them to do that. So my hope is that we can adjust that law so that kids can receive the proper education that they need in Laramie County and in Wyoming.
Follow up, Secretary?
Not on that. I have another question, but I can wait until the next round if that's the way you'd like to proceed.
Okay, well, let me move then to the auditor if she has questions. No questions. Treasurer? No questions. Superintendent?
Mr. Chairman, I just had a couple of questions.
Sure.
I was reading here somewhere, but I can't find it now. You presently do or do not have a headmaster hired?
Mr. Chairman and Superintendent, we do not have one hired. We have an individual that is really about 2 weeks into a month-long process of hiring, and he looks very, very promising. We believe that we will have someone within just a couple of weeks. Again, we didn't want to presume too much based upon your decision, but we have tried to take the steps necessary so that it falls into place very, very quickly.
And could you describe just a little bit that month-long vetting process, what that all involves?
Certainly. So this is one of the reasons why we actually wanted to partner with Hillsdale through the Bonnie Charter School Initiative, so that when we look at an individual who both knows classical education and charter schools, and then has the administrative abilities necessary, that we could find the very best kind of person to lead this forward. Because a headmaster for us is someone who is going to be looking at the hiring process, at filling out each position. And so what that does, the very first step in that process is about 1 week, and only half of the individuals that are submitted during that first week make it through that process. The next step goes about 4 weeks, where we partner with them. The next step goes 4 weeks, and about 20% of people actually fall out during that process. So it's very, very rigorous, very competitive to ensure that we have people who are excellent at both administration and understand our curriculum.
Follow up?
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in regards to your board, you obviously have a high caliber board. Have you all been through the training offered by Hillsdale College, or is that yet to come?
Thank you, Governor and Superintendent. In November of this year, I will be heading out, as will several of our board members, for the first round of training. And then some of them who can't make it in November will be picking it up in April of this coming year. So there is a training process, not just for the headmaster. It's for everyone involved so that we really are achieving our highest aims.
And at this point, Mr. Winters, can you describe a little bit about the model used in that training or not at this point?
Well, I won't have an opportunity to really describe all of that until probably after November. So I'll meet up with you all afterward if you'd like to, and invite you to coffee and describe what I've learned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Secretary, back to you, and then I have a couple of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the assurances that the charter school applicants have to make is that they will not dismiss students or only accept certain students to ensure that they do well on overall, that the school does well on assessments. Can you describe how you plan in general terms to prepare students for the assessments? And then the sub question is, and it may not sound related at the moment, but is it part of the curriculum, and it's probably in there, that the children will have homework to do, or will they be assigned homework on a regular basis?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative.
You demoted me.
What'd you say?
Did you say senator?
No, I said representative.
Oh. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, both really good questions. I'll tackle the second one first because it's really quite easy. Yes, our students will have homework. One thing I would emphasize there is that the school, although it has a curriculum, will have a philosophy of how teachers should instruct, and by that I mean the use of primary source materials, Socratic method, and things of that nature. The reality is that our teachers are still going to have just as much flexibility as they do in our traditional schools to adapt to project-based learning, and even if it's worksheets or whatever that may be, and so some of that will undoubtedly be left to the teacher to decide how much work to take home versus remain in the school. But one thing I would really highlight on that is that the inside the philosophy of the structure of what we're asking our teachers to present to our students is that the curriculum is going to be very rigorous. It's going to meet and exceed all of the Wyoming content and performance standards. And so what that means is there's not a lot of downtime in school. But the design is not to flood the homes with work afterwards either. I think it's possible that there's a lot of downtime in existing schools as well, and our curriculum is really designed to just fill that throughout the day and hopefully minimize some of that in the evening. To the first part of the question, part of that answer is, I guess, the question. Our school philosophically believes that we should not teach to the test, if you will, Mr. Secretary. So how we will prepare our students will submit themselves to standardized testing, no different than any other public school in Wyoming, and so that will be. I don't think you'll see anything different. And just to reiterate, I mean, I'm not sure where this notion comes from, and it wouldn't be familiar, at least in our school, where if a student isn't doing well and we wanted to improve our test scores, that we could just boot that student from the school. We will be a public school, and that's not legal. So our school is open to all students, and regardless of how they perform on tests.
I'd follow that up just briefly.
Yes, please, Secretary.
And just to give Representative Olson, Mr. Winters, just to give the question some context, in reading through these charter school applications, it seems like there's a real emphasis on parental involvement and partnership because I believe successful students have, you know, parents at home that are also helping out. And I guess I wanted to know or avoid the situation where, you know, an assessment comes along and a student is determined to say be deficient in English or math. And if there's no homework between the last assessment and the next assessment, it's really tough for parents to know and gauge for themselves whether their child as a student is performing or able to perform, you know, the mathematics that whatever grade level they're at, 5th grade, 6th grade, or the English or spelling or those types of things. And so that's why I asked the question about homework, because I think that directly relates to assessments when we know you're going to emphasize parental involvement. So that's the context for the question going forward. Don't require another answer. That perhaps that was more of a comment than a follow-up.
Thank you, Secretary. I do see that Mr. Winters is wanting to respond. So.
Yes, sir, Governor, thank you very much. And Secretary, we fully agree with that assessment, and I appreciate it very much. That's one of the reasons why our focus on trying to bring parental involvement and have a little smaller classroom size so that there is that teacher-parent involvement in a very specific way is one of the major keys to our model. And so it actually lines right up with the sentiments you just expressed, and I thank you for it.
Thanks. Any further follow-up, Secretary?
No, sir, I'm good for now.
Okay, thank you. Well, if I may, I just have a couple of questions. It was interesting, you brought up class size requirement, and I also agree. In fact, I was thinking as you were describing this, there was a book, you may remember that I was a single parent for a while with 2 very young daughters. And so I read everything I could come up with, and there was a book called Minding Women, which was published by Yale. And in it talked a lot about how women would do better in small class sizes, and they couldn't keep up if they were in big lecture classes. And you know, I thought the conclusion was irrelevant because I think everyone would do better in small class sizes rather than lecture courses or big lecture surveys. But the question I guess I have is prompted by, as you know, Representative Olson, and you know also from your time when you were representative, Mr. Winters, the state really struggles with how we fund schools going forward. So a couple of things have come up about changing class size. And I'm not asking you for a defense or anything else. I'm just asking if, and who knows what the legislature may do, if they change class size requirements, how do you see that affecting the relationship you have with the school board? And again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I'm just, it posed an issue, so.
I think we both really want to answer this question. We probably have a little bit different to offer, Mr. Chairman. Sure. And I would start by saying in reducing whether class sizes are reduced or not, I think the approval of a good and well put together charter school can address and alleviate some of those concerns. And I want to expand a little bit bigger to the school facilities report that came out the other day, Mr. Chairman, which I'm sure you're aware of. And that is here in Laramie County, more than 1/3 of our schools are over 100% capacity. So we have a capacity issue. We cannot build our schools fast enough to accommodate our growing population, which is phenomenal that Cheyenne and Laramie County has such a growing population. But the approval of our charter school, in part, we hope to reduce that burden within our county. And when we're talking about class sizes, when our capacity is bubbling out, that's exactly what we're talking about here, Mr. Chairman, is that we're pushing those envelopes. And is the solution to have more schools so you can have lower numbers, is to have more teachers, more classrooms. So from my perspective, what I see is that that's definitely an issue of concern. I think we all share wanting the lower class size. And then my hope is just that Cheyenne Classical Academy can help in even the smallest amount to bring that burden down.
Thank you, Governor. And let me also just add that this is exactly why it's been a joy for years to talk to you, either talking about The Economist magazine or the fact that you just read a Yale report on class size from some time past. So that's a real joy. Let me just say that partly based on what he was just talking about, our funding model actually is not 100% of the ADM of a public school. And so we're still able to, based on the models that we've seen, we can still have smaller classroom size and really help these students even on a smaller funding model. And it won't hurt the local school district because we're already seeing that they are pushing that capacity envelope really hard right now. And so really it would be a symbiotic relationship with the local school district.
And thank you. And I think my question was really a bit more nuanced in that if the school funding model results in, let's say higher class sizes, reduced funding for the schools, how does the charter adapt to that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we have, for example, we've prepared a budget that anticipates a 90 to 95% ADM. However, we understand that at the end of the day, the statute only guarantees us 80% ADM. And I think, that's maybe where Nathan was headed, is that we've already budgeted a school anticipating that 20% of the ADM stays in the district and 80% only comes into our school. So if there are adjustments to the funding model, I think we're already going to be prepared for it, because that's our hope, is that, and that going back to this concept of bringing in a service provider to assist us. In the timeline of how this unfolded, we spent about 6 months sitting around the table trying to, and I don't mean this word offensively, mom and pop a charter school. We wanted to design this on our own, completely on our own. And we realized administratively, between human resources and everything else in the back office, that those dollars add up, and expertise. And so the service provider, I think, allows us to provide a lot of the administration inside of the school at a much more effective rate. So I believe we would fit right within the changes if they came.
Thank you. And then related to that, I think you both are aware that the Board of Education is going through its portrait of a graduate at this point, and hopefully also our the RIDE initiative that we've engaged sort of engages on that very question, Representative Olson, that you articulated so well. Who's the client? And I guess you've talked a lot about local control and being responsive to what the Board of Education requirements are and assessments, and they're $2,000 at this point. I mean, most everybody says it takes about 23 years to be able to teach all the assessments that we have. So hopefully they're a little bit more refined and a little more deliverable. My question comes as those are modified over time. What is the process that the charter would engage in to, your curriculum is going to remain consistent and probably meet all of those objectives. So it's not, how are you going to change, but how are you going to be responsive or at least attentive to what changes might happen?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. That's a really great question, and probably one of the examples right now that I would give is computer science. If we went back just a couple of years and we were proposing this curriculum to you, and then the legislature decides that computer standards are very important, and that computer science standards, and that we ought to add that to the pie. So we've contemplated, how does that, for example, fit into our school? And I think there are a lot of out of the box ways that schools can mold themselves to fit some of those nuances that will occur in the standards. And one is in the teachers that you hire. that we believe that, and we hope we are able to hire teachers that have diversity in backgrounds, so that we don't necessarily have to hire a teacher expert in every single subject, but if that, and I know that's a reality. I know that, my wife as a teacher, her license, I don't know, it's 5 or 6 different things that she can teach, Mr. Chairman. And so I think having that approach, one, helps us mold to that. And two, the other thing we hope to do is really partner in our community with our community college, for example, and other partners in bringing in different clubs and extracurriculars, things that can supplement and actually provide the education that the students need. Maybe it's a robotics club that helps supplement that computer science portion so that they can meet and exceed what the standards actually require without necessarily needing an instructional time to do that. So I think, we understand in some, I guess, Mr. Chairman, we understand that is going to ebb and flow with the legislature and with the Board of Education, and we're very much prepared to adapt to it.
Please, Mr. Winters.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Governor. So it's also very important to recognize that we are a unique school. And so we're not necessarily just a public school, just like one that would be right next to us, because the nature of the content that we're trying to deliver, we're very carefully focusing in on some things. So just so you know about our curriculum, we still will hit every detail of Wyoming Statute 21-9-101. And yet at the same time, our delivery and some of our methodology, that's the reason why we actually have pursued seeking a charter model. Where the content actually comes from, it was heavily based on the curriculum and success of Liberty Commons School down in Fort Collins and Ridgeview Classical School, both in Fort Collins. And so they have been able to demonstrate over a period of a couple decades at this particular point that they actually educate to and beyond the Colorado standards, and yet they have that opportunity to work a little differently than otherwise there would be no need to or desire even to pursue a charter school. And so we go about it slightly different, and so we still hit all of the standards set in Wyoming statute, but we do go about it differently.
And thank you. And I really appreciate that, Mr. Winters, because, I think that's one of the challenges we face lots of times is we say, here's an assessment, and then therefore we have to teach to that assessment, whereas sometimes we can incorporate it in a broader course. Let me ask you, and also let me praise you for commenting on public schools. Thank you, Representative Olson particularly. I was disturbed by the coverage we saw last time, and I think in the excitement of a new opportunity for school, sometimes it's hard to avoid a comparison, but thank you at the outset for stating that you're not being in any way critical of currently. The last thing that I wanted to just, you mentioned it's a lottery that people would engage in. Is that, just sort of describe that process to me.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So the lottery only kicks in if the class size cap is reached. So if there are, X number of kindergartners permitted into the school, if we have more expressions of interest than the number of spots we have available, then that's when the lottery system kicks in. Logistically, do you have anything else to offer on the lottery?
Governor, so we do have individuals, experts in the room who actually not only know how that works in other places, but one of them happens to be one of the foremost people who have developed that over time. If I may, Governor, I'd like to step back and just add to something that you expressed and that Mr. Olson expressed as well. The basis of our approach to academics in general is that it's pre-political. Oftentimes people get involved in a conversation without even knowing what they're talking about. And so part of the reason why we try to interact with the great minds of the past is so that we can learn from them what matters and why it matters and everything else. And so our goal, our aim is far, far different than any sort of political model. It's actually engaging with great minds. So later on, an individual, as they finally are a voting citizen at some point in the future, they have interacted with great minds. And so that's the reason why our approach, we're trying to emphasize that what we're doing is completely pre-political.
And Mr. Chairman, just, you know, I don't have all of the specifics on the lottery, but what I do know about the lottery is that, one, it's randomized. Two, there are some preferences built in automatically, and that's not uncommon. So for example, Snowy Range Academy, and I'm not really sure off the top of my head if how Podair does their lottery, but the preferences that would be built in would be for siblings, for example. So obviously that advances ahead of the lottery. If you already have a child enrolled in the school, we give a preference point to your incoming second child. And then the other preference point might exist for faculty and staff, students as well. And then beyond that, I suppose it's literally just randomization into I would hope there's a nice algorithm and you plug the names in and it pulls out so many.
Sure. Well, terrific. And I think, Mr. Winters, your comment about, and Representative Olson, about the curriculum being so important is critical. But you've also alluded, and I agree with you 100%, parent involvement is essential. And when we have parents that can select into a system that provides that, and I'm not saying this in a preferential and in any way discriminatory way, it's great to have parent involvement. And I think usually educational outcomes are better when parents are involved. And you also end up with peers being much more engaged and perhaps more ambitious. And so all of those things augur well, I think, for the experience here. The question or reason I was asking about the lottery is, how do we then also at least allow for, maybe others to be able to participate in that kind of an environment, so.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, if I may, please just expand a little bit about on parental involvement and what that really means. And I don't mean to disparage any other system, but if, when we say that, we really don't mean parents doing a bake sale. That's an awesome thing too, but we mean a much higher level. And in your hearing on the 6th, I believe there was a question, there's at least a question or a statement involving the statutes as to transportation funding. And, what we find with charter school involvement across the United States is that on average, parents will self-transport their children up to 45 minutes to the school of their choice without any hesitation. And that's not an option for everyone, and we appreciate that, and we're not certainly saying that it should be, but I just stress that on the focal point of parental involvement, that it's not always the case, but it is usually the case that parents that are much more involved are attracted to a school like ours, or because they're taking the time to shop for the school that they want. And so if they have to transport their child to and from, usually that's a given. And then we don't have any mandatory parental involvement or required hours of volunteerism, because we don't find it necessary, because we believe that the parents who have shopped for our school, they're going to automatically want to be involved, and we're going to fight to find them the places where they can devote their energy and time.
Well, thank you very much. Let me, I see Auditor, you have a question.
Or 17.
I've taken my share, so you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll apologize in advance. No one would mistake me for an expert in all things education. So I apologize if these are clunky. However, I do have 2 children and was educated in public schools myself. So first question, sort of following up on the parental involvement, I don't think that anyone, or at least I don't, have any doubts that you will have robust and sufficient interest to open the school and succeed. And I think I would guess that it will trend to students who have a robust parent involvement, folks who have time to, as you mentioned, shop for a school, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm guessing, again, there's statistics on this, I don't know. How will the school particularly reach out to make sure they have sort of a broad cross-section of students from Cheyenne that can succeed? And that's it. That involves a bunch of students who don't have parent involvement, whose parent might be working 2 or 3 jobs, or who is maybe in foster care, but really would fit well and really excel in a school like yours. So talk to me a little bit about how are you reaching out to make sure you have a representative, that you're catching as many students as you can, not just students from high-functioning 2-parent homes who are probably going to end up doing okay in whatever educational system they end up in. And again, sorry for the lumpy question, but that's my first one.
Thank you, Governor and Auditor. I really appreciate lumpy questions. And so let me just tackle that one if I may. First of all, we do have a number of involvement nights, community nights, where we introduce ourselves to a lot of different people. And this has been very classic within the charter school movement going back for decades anyway. One of the individuals who really championed it in time past, a man by the name of Thomas Sowell, grew up in a broken home, a dysfunctional home. And he has been one of the people that have really pushed this forward over time, the idea that we can give children that opportunity to thrive. And what we're able to do by doing that is by pulling from so many different resources, we'll be spreading throughout, of course, pulling from a lot of different situations, regardless of where they are in Laramie County. And so that parent involvement night and then the appreciation night, and we're already getting a number of people who are reaching out just through word of mouth from all over the community and not just one particular socioeconomic background.
May I keep
Please.
going?
Yeah.
Where you are taking your curriculum, I'm aware that off the shelf isn't quite the right word, but where we are accessing a very robust and available curriculum from another state, from elsewhere. Talk to me about how Wyoming-specific learning will be incorporated into that. And I joke, but I'm actually sort of serious. I think one of the most useful things I learned, and I think it was in 4th grade, is you memorize all the Wyoming counties and their county seats, and most importantly, the number on the license plates. So,
Only in Wyoming.
Well, which we all had to use today to log into the Wi-Fi. Am I wrong? How will that be incorporated, and how do you find time for that and access that curriculum when you're purchasing this other curriculum? I bet Jared learned that too, because we went to the same elementary school.
Yeah. We did, Mr. Chairman. There's a couple of points there, and one, I do want to clarify: we're not purchasing a curriculum. We by applying to be to utilize the curriculum of the Barney Charter School Initiative, we are authorized to use their curriculum, and it is free to us, including the collections of access to collections of books, which will build our library. But I want to also clarify that we're not necessarily obligated to be married to that curriculum either. That's something that's very important about having the local control of our board, is that our board maintains complete control over our provider, over the curriculum that we use. So Wyomingizing that, I don't think any of that is going to change. I was trying to, all of that's absolutely a part of a good education in Wyoming, and I was trying to explain this earlier, and I probably didn't do a really good job, but I don't think it's about finding the time, because we believe that the time is there. It's how the time is best utilized. And I'll give one example, and I'm not pointing to any particular school in general, but In the 1920s and 30s, a different model of educating was developed in the United States based on grouping students in a classroom. And we're all familiar with this because if we walk into a classroom, we see 4 desks together here, 4 desks together here, 4 desks together here. And what the theory is a good theory. The theory is that students will collaborate and learn from each other. But the result of that is good. But there's also a negative result to that at times. And the negative result is that an unlicensed teacher is teaching another student. That is a student teaching a student. The student is not a licensed teacher. So, and part of the reason why I believe that maybe we adapted that is not just based out of the theory that they would collaborate, but based out of necessity. Of going back to the conversation with the governor earlier in the class size, the reality is what it allows the educator to do is step away from the groups, maybe provide self-directed worksheets while working with another group over here. Our model is to walk away from that downtime and maximize all the time we have. So I believe that there is a lot of time left in the day where these things that we're talking about, whether it's county lines or whatever, can be taught and introduced. And I do, Auditor, I do want to go back just briefly to your first question too, because I wasn't trying to be rude, but I was trying to pull something up on my phone while you were asking that question, because I wanted to give you some data on this expressions of interest that we have in our school. And we have just under 250 students in Laramie County that have expressed interest, and we've kind of paused that in preparation for this. We assume that will go, we'll continue that back up after hopefully we have an approval. But what is fascinating about our expressions of interest is they are very diverse. They're diverse across the triads. They're not equal across the triads, but they're very diverse. East and Central had about a similar expression of interest, but the South Side also had a very high expression of interest. 25% of those who expressed interest in our school actually come from a homeschool background, and only 13% come from a private school background. So still the majority of them are coming from a public school background. Some of them come from other school districts, Platte County, which you have an application in front of you regarding that, and LC2. And only 5 come from existing charter schools. So I know there's lots of different ways to look at diversity and what that really means, but I wanted to highlight that as an example that what we've already found is this large net being cast across the various parts of Laramie County. And then one other piece to that, which I assume this question will also be coming later about our facility. And one of the facilities that we've been really interested in and looking at is the old Boys and Girls Club on the south side. That interests us significantly for 3 reasons. 1, because it might be workable. 2, because it's on the south side of this county, and because that's where our lower expression of interest is, and we would like to bring that number up. And then 3 is the ability to partner with the Boys and Girls Club for activities, but also other things that we talked about earlier, bringing in some of the outside learning models through that.
Mr. Chairman, facility was actually my next question. If there's anything you want to add as far as near term, I read in your application, but if there's been currently you don't have anything locked up, but any other comments on near term and not so near term?
Thank you. So in discussing facilities, I don't want to do anything that would be presumptuous. We have been working very hard with one of the leading commercial real estate developers in Cheyenne and looking at our options. And so first of all, we did have a wonderful conversation with Boys and Girls Club. One of the situations there is that will only provide about 6 classrooms. Now, there are ways potentially to expand that, because 6 classrooms basically for us is K through 2nd grade. But there is a potential to expand that through the use of modulars. That would be one situation. Secondly, we have recently taken a look at the old Jonah Bank building, and there's a back entrance there that is separate and segregated from the rest of the facility. And I believe anyone involved in politics knows that facility pretty well. Thirdly, then, we are looking eventually to build our own facility. And we have been looking, right now it's in the Sweetgrass subdivision directly across from LCCC, where 16.3 acres are currently available. And we have been in talks about that. And so let me just narrow it down. We have had to strategize using both a short-term and long-term look at what we're going to do. How we first of all get started August 2023, we have several different options in front of us. And then what the long-term strategy is on finding a place, a facility of our own. And so both of those are working at the same time.
And Auditor, I am so sorry. Mr. Chairman, Auditor, I'm sorry. Sometimes my brain is scattered in my response to your question. And regarding county lines in Wyoming history, Wyoming history is required to be taught in the 4th grade. The example again I'll give at Snowy Range Academy, that's built into their core knowledge curriculum. They have to teach it. So I may have glossed over that maybe too briefly by saying we'll do it, but I want to, we're very cognizant of the reality that of what the standards are, and that will be taught no different in our school than it is in the existing core knowledge school.
And Mr. Chairman, one final comment, and this is really to the Cheyenne Classical Academy and the Wyoming Classical Academy. I was reviewing the family handbook, which I love. I wish I had one for everything. I love it when there's a handbook, and I think that's very comprehensive. I have been reading in the news that there's some charter schools kind of in some hot water legally over their dress codes and the specificity of their dress codes. And I know the legislature has recently sort of simplified theirs. And so I'm sure you're having a robust legal review of that before you were to put it into action. But and again, not expressing any personal opinion or anything, but just something that jumped out at me that I wouldn't want anybody to get crosswise on that.
Mr. Chairman and Auditor, thank you. We do not want to get crossways on that either. The uniforms are not there for uniform's sake to be there. They're there as part of the culture of the school. That concept of discipline within the school and structure within the school is the philosophy behind the uniform. What exactly they look like at the end of the day, I think matters a little less than their existence is there. And I would say that our board understands also that at the forefront of all of that, of course, is the curriculum or the instruction of the students is far more important than that ancillary piece. But the discipline inside the school is important because we do believe that we are doing more than just helping kids to reach a point on how to think, but also providing them with structure to succeed in life. So I appreciate your comments on that, and we will definitely do a thorough review of that policy.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Or unless.
Governor, if I may just add on to that just a touch. When it comes to uniforms, that sense of identity, of belonging with other people, that's one of the reasons why we really seek that out. One of the other things that we do in what we hope to be a sister school down in just a school that also follows the curriculum. When I went and toured Golden View Classical Academy, they also had subdivided their school into different houses, much like you would have seen, and they didn't pick things like Slytherin and other things, but they did pick famous names from the past, from Rome. And they had Cicero House and Publius House, and you go through that. And we have been talking about that as well, having Washington House. If it was up to my friend here, we would have Jefferson House. That's his favorite founder. Mine's Madison. We'll have Madison House for sure. And that's a long conversation there. But it's all because of that sense of identity and really helping people understand not only are you learning, you're learning for a purpose and a reason and a cause. And the uniform is actually a piece of all of that. And so that's why we care so much about it.
Terrific. Any further follow-up? Well, let me ask Treasurer any questions? Superintendent, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first thing I'd like to say is I appreciate this curriculum and this philosophy's connectivity to the past, the respect for the past, and all of what that offers. But I think at the ground level, just the humility that cultivates, that we don't know it all, and that there are many great minds that have come before us, and we can learn from them, as well as the elderly folk in our lives. I think that's some of what that can communicate. I commend you also on your sensitivity to and your emphasis on the parent as the client. I very much appreciate that, and I know parents will as well. Just by way of brief commentary and challenge on the homework issue, having been a classroom teacher for 17 plus years and then also having headed up a classical school, I know if classical teachers err on that issue, it tends to be on the side of too much homework rather than too little. And so you'll need a strong headmaster to rein them in on that. That will be the challenge there, I assure you. I had a question on page 7, under the community support. I see you have, as of the date of application, school list, 130 families who have filled out interest forms and 220 students, but Representative Olson, I heard you say it's now up to 250 students?
248.
And what number of families would that be? Would that translate to? Is that above 130s?
I'm sorry, I don't have that
Okay.
exact number.
Just curious. Then also on page 7, I was reading this one paragraph where it says, charter schools face opposition from several adversaries, including school districts and teachers unions. Cheyenne Classical Academy specifically has faced opposition due to its affiliation with Hillsdale College, which is known as a conservative Christian college, despite the fact that the curriculum is non-secular. Did you mean to say non-sectarian? Is that a typo, or am I misunderstanding something?
Yes, sir, I'm sorry. That should read non-sectarian.
Yeah.
And that actually happened there in the early 1900s, where they actually became a non-sectarian school. Back when they were founded in 1845, you're right, they were much like Yale, Harvard, Princeton, and every one of the Ivies, they were a sectarian school. But they stepped out of that realm in the early 1900s. So it is not proper to actually call it a Christian institution necessarily.
Yes. And is it opening up too much of a can of worms to ask you folks how you define sectarian and how religious freedom plays into all of that?
Well, there's a lot of places to go with that. I will say, when it comes to the question of sectarianism, there have been 3 court cases over the last 3 or 4 years, all the way at the U.S. Supreme Court, that have absolutely eviscerated what is called the Blaine Amendment and the question of sectarian education. And so that hasn't quite trickled to Wyoming yet, and yet every indication through a lot of phone calls have said that if anyone attempts to pursue that particular thing, the Supreme Court has been abundantly clear. Again, though, we are not a sectarian school. We focus in on classical learning. And what you'll find if you read the documents and things that we're introducing, you'll find actually Greek and Latin writers, the ancients, far more than you'll find almost anything else. Now, we do teach a comprehensive view of history through our social studies curriculum, but a classical education is not necessarily a sectarian education. So if that is the nature of the question you're asking, that's what we're approaching.
Well, the nature of the question is I just know a lot of different people define sectarian in a lot of different ways. And I just wanted to know what your contextual understanding was on that. I also want to say I appreciate your emphasis on how true education or timeless education transcends political ideology. I appreciate that. And final question would be, because I heard it a lot up in Cody, how do you respond to the criticism that classical schools are elitist?
Governor and Superintendent, we actually try to pull from as many different places as we possibly can, and every child is equal when they come into our school. We're not elitist. We will train children with the very best education they can possibly find. And they may actually achieve, and often do achieve, going to very high-ranking schools. That has been shown over and over again through the kind of school that we're planning on. But when a person comes in the door, those kids are all equal, and they come from all different walks of life and socioeconomic backgrounds. So we're not aiming to be just elite by only selecting from among what is considered elite by some. That's a moving target. What we do produce, though, is a student that is absolutely among the very best in this state and in the region.
Yeah.
If I may,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, Superintendent, just to add to that, the other thing I would add to that is, we purposefully chose the path of becoming a public charter school because we wanted to make ourselves available to all students in Laramie County. And we could have just as easily have chose the path to say, why not just design a private school? If our board had the viewpoint of being elitist, I think the very nature of choosing to be a public charter school is what defeats that concept. That we wanted a different path as opposed to what we could have done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know Dr. Benjamin Carson's mom often got accused or criticized of being an elitist mom by how she raised her boys and by insisting they turn off the TV and read books. And she just ignored the criticism and went on. But I think it's important for you as classical school leaders to, be prepared to respond to those perceptions and those criticisms.
Thank you. And Governor and Superintendent, by that standard, I too, though I grew up in what would by most people be called a poor to very low middle class household, if that is the standard for elitism, then my parents, my dad, who was a public school administrator in the state of Missouri before I was born, Dad made the purposeful choice of moving every TV out of our home. And as a result, by the age of 9, I had read all of the blue set of World Book encyclopedias. If that is the definition of elitism, having read more than most other people of my age, then maybe I'm guilty of it. But on the other hand, if it's that was because I had parents that cared, and I had a school background of people who cared very much. And so we actually want that opportunity for every child. Obviously, our schools are not going to be taking the TVs out of everybody's homes, but still, we want them to thrive and succeed no matter where they come from. And that's the reason why we want to found this particular charter school.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Director, I just want to note that the secretary inadvertently dropped. And I don't know, Mr. Bumpy, he said he was trying to get reconnected, and the issue may be on his side, just for people's information. If I don't have any more questions from the board here, Mr. or Deputy Superintendent, are there further comments that you might have?
Mr. Chairman, there are no further comments from me. Ready for public testimony.
Okay, Madam Director, any comments from you?
No, Mr. Chairman, no comments from me at this time.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. I'm going to ask for public comment at this point. So if anybody'd like to address the board, please come up, and you can pick one of the podiums here, and please, if you push the button, the red light will come on, and then if you can just tell us your name for the record. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. I've got a brief statement that I'd like to read. So I come before you today asking to take into consideration a number of factors before you approve the authorization of these charter schools. First and foremost, districts across the state are working with limited resources, and most are having substantial difficulties attracting and retaining the types of educators that they need. This includes classroom teachers, paraprofessionals, transportation, food service, a number of other positions. So if we're having difficulty filling these vacancies in our schools already, where are we going to draw from to fill these positions in these schools? Are we going to draw from our current existing public education, already compounding that problem? Districts across the state have a variety of facility issues, from major maintenance to need of additional facilities like was mentioned here in Cheyenne. These circumstances and more have substantial negative impacts on our students in the K-12 public education system, a system that we should keep in mind, and I'm glad Representative Olson pointed out, that has done a great service to our students in the state of Wyoming as we continually rank as one of the best in the nation for education. The aforementioned difficulties are products of gross underfunding by the state legislature, and yet here we are discussing opening 3 new schools during a time where education funding has come into question amidst a backdrop of teacher shortages and high levels of teacher burnout and dissatisfaction. It's important to understand that these schools will have additional revenue costs associated with them. Recognizing the issue, the timing for opening 3 new charter schools will strain the resources of these districts seems questionable at the least, if not wholly inappropriate. Couple these issues with the fact that the process that is being used to authorize these charter schools robs districts of the local control that we profess to care so much about. Their direct and continued involvement in the process is imperative. And while there have been mention of trustees in both Natrona County and here in Cheyenne that support this effort, I have spoke with trustees in both Natrona County and here in Cheyenne that do not support this effort and raise substantial concerns. Among those, some of the issues that were pointed out related back to previous charter schools. I've heard directly from members of Larimer County School District Number 1 regarding the Poe Dare Academy here in Cheyenne, and that at its inception, it had issues regarding financials and special education service delivery. And this required substantial district resource allocation, time, personnel, with district involvement in the authorization process to remedy that. Now, here we are getting ready to authorize these 3 charter schools without substantial and ongoing consultation with those who are directly impacted by the authorization of such schools. Finally, in regards to the Casper and Cheyenne charter schools, we have had a number of our members who are history and social studies educators reach out to us with concern over the curriculum that is a product of Hillsdale College. Again, I do want to reiterate some of the concerns that have already been voiced here, and that the president of Hillsdale College is a vehement anti-public education individual, and has acknowledged that Hillside curriculum has been criticized for its glossy spin on American history, as well as its ideological tilt on topics like affirmative action. Educators and historians have also raised questions about other instructions at Hillsdale Charter Schools, citing the negative take on the New Deal and the Great Society and cursory presentation of global warming. While we appreciate the fact that this meeting is being held virtually, the timing couldn't be a little bit more problematic for our educators who were just starting their school year, who, if they wanted to come and testify, that would raise an issue for them. We have reached out to our membership to offer comment. I think a couple of them have sent you comment, but one in particular I would like to read, if I may. The proponents of this school and curriculum are fond of saying that the purpose of education is to teach students how to think, not what to think. And it's about creating citizens by upholding great American thinkers so that our children learn to promulgate American values. But any history educator who has taken a moment to read the 1776 curriculum can tell right away it doesn't teach students how to think. In fact, it teaches students what to think. For example, it deprives students of a perspective that even the High Court has grappled with. Is the court in its power of judicial review to exercise judicial restraint, or should it be judicially activist, issuing law from the bench, or strictly interpreting the Constitution? The curriculum suggests, through selected quotations of key framers, that the single narrative that only a judicially restrained perspective is valid. Accomplished history educators know that multiple perspectives is how to teach students to think critically, to weigh evidence, to gather all evidence and consider it before forming a conclusion. Taking classical American exceptionalism, but also providing the historical perspective of, say, Howard Zinn, recognizing the tragedies but realities of slavery and its progeny, systemic racism. Providing the historical perspective of, say, President Grover Cleveland, but also the significance and importance of figures like Eugene V. Debs, especially, or the Progressive Party of the 1920s, especially on the heels of our recent Labor Day observation. We don't exclude historical perspectives we don't like. That is not conducive to producing a well-rounded student who uses critical thought. History is filled with controversial questions. For example, who started the Cold War? Is it ever right, under any circumstance, to curtail civil liberties in the name of national security? Are there things the public or taxpayers should not have the right to know? And what must we do in a free society when our rights conflict with another? Although none of us owned slaves or took land from our nation's original inhabitants, how might we and their descendants benefit or suffer today because of the legacy of that history, and how might we correct it? And that was from one of our social studies teachers who was a member of ours. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Are there any questions for Mr. Mullen? Mr. Mullen, I have one as a historian trained anyway. One of the greatest reads I think I ever had was E.H. Carr's book, What is History? Are you familiar with that book?
Mr. Chairman, Governor Gordon, I am not.
Okay. It's a wonderful book in that it talks about history is not only primary sources, but it's also the interpretation of those primary sources. And the fact that our interpretation varies with each age. So as ages pass, our review of what those primary sources, indeed our review of what the first interpretations are, changes over time. And it seems to me very, very important that education teach that ability to reflect on the times that we're in and the times that not only the history that we're reading was written, but also the primary sources. Do you see anything in this process that is going to defeat that, either in the traditional education or in the classical?
Mr. Chairman, Governor Gordon, the concerns that were raised regarding this curriculum is a number of issues regarding selectivism in terms of which portions of that history we're discussing, which perspectives of that history we're discussing. I'm sure Representative Olson can talk at length at this since Jefferson is his favorite, but right, the discussion about as a slave owner, did Jefferson want slavery to end? Truthfully, what did that look like from a variety of perspectives? So the issue that, again, was raised seemed to be a lack of variety of perspectives on some of those issues. In terms of our public education and some of the lessons that I know that are taught across our state, I've seen nothing but excellence out of those classrooms.
Thank you. Well, great. Are there any other questions? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
for
if
your
you want to send
testimony.
that book my way, I'd be glad to read it.
I'll get you a copy, Mr. Mullen. Thanks. I do see that we have a hand raised, or maybe two hands raised. Mr. Bump.
Mr. Chairman, Dave Throgmorton.
Mr. Throgmorton, I think the floor is yours.
Greetings. Thank you very much. I am calling in from Rollins this time. My name is Dave Throgmorton. I'm calling in from Rollins, Wyoming. Appreciated meeting with you all last Tuesday. Upon reflection on driving home, somewhere around Buford, I kind of figured out that some of the things that I said, or at least the way I said them, sounded both impertinent and rude. And for that, I apologize. It wasn't my intention to be rude. But I think I came across that way in a couple of areas. I'm not going to plow a field that's already been plowed. A lot of the objections that I have to these charter schools have been outlined very clearly. I think I outlined them last time, and they've been outlined today. A couple of things specifically about this particular application for the Cheyenne school. I am concerned about the location, and I'm very glad to hear that they are looking at several other locations. I thought that the optic of the only choices were three large churches in Cheyenne as the locations. I thought that was a really bad choice, and I continue to think that. And I'm hoping that if this charter is successful, that this group is encouraged to find housing somewhere besides a church, because it kind of blurs that whole sectarian notion that you were talking about earlier, when in fact the students have to walk past iconography on the way to class back and forth. I think it's interesting the level of community support for these two charter schools, the one in Cheyenne, the one in Casper, as opposed to the one in Chugwater. When I read the section on community support, for the Cheyenne School. It appeared that some of the board members had parties and invited their friends and neighbors over to discuss the Hillsdale School. And that was kind of what they used as their support for community support. I was glad to see that they supplemented that with the number of families that are actually interested in this. One thing might just be a fun fact. I have been politically active for my entire life. And the very first political campaign in which I was active was for one of the members of the Cheyenne Community School. Mr. McIlvaine taught me how to be a good citizen, and I have appreciated that ever since. That being said, at the end of the day, by the time I got to Bosler, or maybe it was somewhere between Bosler and Rock River, I got to thinking about this, and I think it will be fascinating should Slib grant all three of these charters to see the difference between one charter that is clearly homegrown, clearly based out of a very serious need in Chugwater in Platte County. The community support for it is overwhelming. The kind of work that is going to have to go into their school is considerably different than the kind of work that's going to have to go into the other two schools that are coming in with a slick model, coming in with a canned curriculum, which it's nice to hear that there's a little bit of variability in that curriculum. And frankly, coming in with a little bit of baggage behind him because, frankly, the Hillsdale School president is in fact notoriously anti-public school. And I think it's kind of interesting that people are kind of stepping all over one another to praise public schools, while in fact the community that we're thinking about partnering with at this moment has gone quite the other way. But that being said, in 5 years, I will be very curious to see the degree to which the Hillsdale model has been embraced and warmly accepted in the Wyoming culture, and the degree to which the Wyoming culture embraces those portions of the Hillsdale model that are actually pertinent to us in Wyoming, and manage to reject some of the rest of them. As a sociologist, I'll be watching that with interest. I appreciate the fact that you've had a lot of public input in these things, and I look forward to seeing where you go with this. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Throgmorton. Let me ask if anybody has questions. None. Secretary Buchanan?
None, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bump?
Mr. Chairman, Marguerite Herman.
Ms. Herman, always good to hear from you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be brief. And mostly, I think I just want to, now I really appreciate all the questions asked by the SLIB members. I just had two questions that I was kind of looking for, didn't hear raised, so I'm going to raise them. Also, sort of parenthetically, well, Marguerite Herman, I'm finishing up my second term on Laramie County School District #1 board. And so I have the distinction of being actually in a position of evaluating two charter applications, having approved them, voting to approve them, and voting to renew them, and having watched our district staff, the amount of support that we were very happy to give, but was necessary to give to ensure the success of the two Podair schools. And I'll say that they have succeeded, and it is our desire to have them succeed. So it has really been a good partnership and a good integration of a truly unique school with the support of a large school district. And I guess that brings me to my first question. Will the state funding adjust the model to cover a high cost of a small school that is standalone, as I've heard it described, I guess, I assume I'm right, independent of local school districts, and so providing their own expertise needed for what I understand to be a typical group of students, considering the expense and efficiency sacrificed when a school is not integrated with the existing and extensive system of professional services. I'm thinking about students with complicated health and mental health issues, educational needs, and I can read the long list of things that our district does currently, still ongoing years later, to help to support Podair, because it's a small school. The two schools together are about 200 students. So, and anyway, I'm coming from that perspective that the difficulty and the cost, I guess, you know, you can afford anything if you have enough money, but the efficiency of a standalone to provide all those sometimes very high levels of professional expertise, in addition to nutrition, transportation, and those more mundane day-to-day needs of a district, which once again, we were very happy to support PODER. But the other question is, do you have reasonable expectation of how much the state will pay Academica and how much it will cost to spend on facilities? Will there be oversight on finances so taxpayers can know there's no conflict of interest or other questions or even appearances that may arise with a for-profit management company, because Academica is for-profit. So the cost of a standalone independent system, and then oversight just to make sure that there is just adequate oversight of the finances, seeing as our tax dollars are going toward a for-profit organization. Those two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. Let me ask if there are any questions. Mr. Secretary, any question?
No, sir.
Madam Auditor, Treasurer, Superintendent? Thank you, Ms. Herman. Appreciate your testimony. Thank you very much. Mr. Bump, it looks like we have another hand up.
Mr. Chairman, Chris Corfanta.
Ms. Corfanta, nice to have you on Zoom, and the floor is yours. It appears you're muted.
There we go. First, I'll see if you can hear me okay. I don't have the greatest computer.
We can hear you, and just if you can identify yourself, please.
Sure. Thank you. This is Chris Corfanta. I'm speaking to you from my place outside of Ranchester, Wyoming. I'm a retired public school teacher of 34 years, and I'm a parent of children that went to school all the way through. I still have one at UW. I appreciate the opportunity to comment. I heard a lot of values I think we all share. We all want our kids to learn skills and knowledge, especially now that we have an ever-changing, complex world. We all want our kids to know how to think and not what to think. Most of us want more civics in our public schools. My daughter, one of the best pieces of education for her and her family was the We the People project that was hosted at Sheridan High School. That project is not in all public schools, and that would be wonderful to have. They learned all kinds of things, a lot of what Mr. Olson spoke about the great thinkers, etc. All of us, I think, want unbiased teaching. None of us want students to be indoctrinated. Those are all values I think we share. One that I haven't heard is the value of separation of church and state. That even though the classical education, the Hillsdale curriculum, seems to be dance around the idea of Christian education.
Ms. Corfanta, can I stop you for just a second? I
Yes.
don't know. Can others hear?
Okay.
Can you start back? For me, it was right after you said unbiased teaching is something we all look forward to.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I have to move really close to my computer. Good thing you don't have a visual of me. You'll see it.
You kind of fade in and out. I don't know if you can position yourself close to the microphone.
All right, is this better? My gosh, I'll try on my phone. I am so sorry. I will try to speak as loud as I can. Is that better?
That is better, yes.
Okay, I will use my old classroom voice. None of us want our students to be indoctrinated, but a value that I hold dear is the separation of church and state. And the Family Policy Alliance that Mr. Olson belongs to, if you look them up, that is definitely Christian based, which I have no problem with Christian education. I believe we do need religion in our lives. I just do not want my public tax dollars being spent on, it's a slippery slope of the separation of church and state. And in a time when the legislature has been unable to address funding of our public schools, considering using funds for schools that will use this curricula that seems to have a biased agenda, and a lot of people across the nation who are right-leaning, far right-leaning, are pushing the same curricula in their states. That's just plain wrong, I think. We all need to be prioritizing and funding a fair and equitable education for all of us. Our students are more important than politics. I sat on a lot of curriculum committees in my day where we had textbook publishers talk about their shiny curriculum. And I think we're politicizing this in that we're having, you know, I want to give credence to Mr. Olson. I don't like to be critical, but this is very similar to the same kinds of presentations teachers on curriculum committees heard when curriculum specialists are, you know, textbook publishers were trying to sell their curriculum. The difference is those pitches were made to teachers on curricula committees. We compared and contrast curricula. We created curricula. We had to go through approval processes for curricula. We have elected school board members that have oversight. This is kind of, I think someone said standalone in that they will have their own board. There's just not, when public dollars are being spent on something like this, I really, really encourage the board to take a step back and look at it carefully. I know it's just a slippery slope. We all want small class sizes for our kids. We all want parent involvement with our in our schools. Teachers are begging for parent involvement. I know that some schools, some teachers might be reluctant for parent involvement. On the whole, when parents are involved, the kids and the education process is much better. Again, our kids are more important than politics. This has a political bent. I really want us to be for kids and to put our public dollars helping all public schools. Thank you. I hope you heard most of what I said.
Ms. Corfanta, I think we did. I'm seeing head nods here. So thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions? Not hearing any.
One comment.
Sure.
I really, really appreciate what's been going on with the profile of a graduate. I'd really like us all to focus on that and work on improving all our schools and all the education for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corfanta. I have two more hands raised online. Let me just take a scan of the audience to see if there are a few that would like to step forward. Let me kind of get a sense of how many. Okay, thank you. I hesitate to do this, but I think I am going to try to keep us limited on time of comments. Madam Director, just so we don't get too lost. We still want to have some time. It would seem to me 3 to 4 minutes would be appropriate. Does that seem to fit with most everyone's expectations? Okay, very good. So let me, I see two people online, Mr. Bump. Let's have can you tell me who the two people are, and we can hear them, and then we'll go to the testimony here in the room.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The first one is Jamie Lean.
Okay, thank you. You have the floor, Mr. Lean.
Hi, my name is Jamie Lean. I live in Natrona County. I have a Cheyenne Central graduate and a Natrona County High School graduate. I also have 3 other children in my home. And while I understand that this board has an important decision to make, I just wanted to encourage you to make the appropriate decision to give the students a choice that these 3 charter schools, excuse me, including the one in Chugwater, the 3 charter schools would give us an opportunity to put our children in public schools that meet our values as a parent, which is our right. And your job as an elected official is to give us the choices that best meet our needs as Wyomingites. And that was all I wanted to do today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Lean. Any questions, comments? None. Okay, thank you. Mr. Bump, who's next?
Mr. Chairman, Kathy Scigliano.
Ms. Gigliano.
Hello, it's Kathy Sigliano. Thank you. I am just simply a parent here in Laramie County. I have 2 boys that are in the Laramie County School District 1. Just after hearing a couple of the public comments and after just hearing what Jamie spoke, she basically said in a better way than what I'll probably say, we do want a choice. There's nothing wrong with having a choice, having more choices. It would just increase the other schools in the district to perform better. Right now, we see the test scores for YTOP just recently came out, and we're seeing these terribly low scores for our children and in their reading and their literature and their math. Why not give parents a better choice, if that's what we choose, to send our children to a school that might possibly be able to raise those scores for individual children's needs? To kind of go back on the first gentleman that spoke publicly, you know, I got the impression that he was saying for history, he feels that this would be skewed in a certain way, but we're already seeing that throughout the United States in so many different schools where teachers are taking their own opinions and their own ways of interpretation and twisting it so that it is sort of an indoctrination. We are not wanting our kids to be indoctrinated with certain philosophies from some teachers. To speak on the lady that just spoke a couple ago, you know, she was talking about indoctrination and how she doesn't want kids to be put in this political realm, but we're already seeing that so much today. We're seeing so much of this gender ideology being pushed in our schools. So it's already there. It's just on the opposite end of what majority of the parents want us to have as a choice for our kids to have a different type of learning than what they're seeing in schools now. I encourage you to pass these charter schools so that you are giving parents a better opportunity for their kids and more choices. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sigliano. Any questions? I don't see any. Thank you very much for your testimony. So now we'll go to the audience. Please can come on up, and I think this is Mr. Maldonado. Can you hit the little red button on?
There you go.
Okay, now it's red. Good afternoon, Governor, and everybody here. My name is Sergio Maldonado. I am from the Wind River Reservation. I am a grandfather, a father, parent, raised 7 children. They've all done very well in public schools. The point I want to make here, and I love what people have been saying, because this is the type of forum that we must hear. Number one, life is about choice. I've always told my children from the time they were little people growing up to adults. I can't believe my oldest is already 45. But I still remind them this. Life is choice, but life is work. And whatever choice you make, be ready for the repercussions of that. So far, we've been good. This whole notion of a private school, a charter school, that's choice. This is a forum where we are discussing this. I am still a bit ambivalent about this simply because when you plug in 250 potential students at 17,000 ADM monies, you're talking about a whole lot of money, especially in light of the fact that in Wyoming, our education funding has been savagely, if I may, that may be too hard of an adjective, but it has been savagely taken apart. I know that we have quality teachers, principals, superintendents. I wrote every one of our teachers a letter, signed every one of the letters, superintendents a letter. I support public education, but at the same time, I'm not hard pressed to say I don't support choice, because life is choice. And this is a serious decision that this board, Slib board, will make that will have ramifications down the road with all of our students. I have a professional teaching standards board here in Wyoming. I substitute with Fremont County 38, 3, 4, 5 times a month, spread out through my other activities. A marginalized community that's their academic achievement scores, well, I can say this for everybody on the Wind River Indian Reservation, radically skew the state scores. So if we want to talk about what needs to be done, is it money? I do not know. Is it quality teachers? I do know that we need that. But one thing that I do not see, and again, with no disparity at all, our communities across the state, and I've been 9,000 miles across this state, all over, and I'm not done yet. Our parents must take a greater level of involvement in their children's education. That's all there is to it. But how do you, if I may, legislate morality when we have to share with parents that you must become more involved? But yet I look at my community. I am from the reservation. I'm looked at as a tribal elder, as a communicator. Everything that is needed, Sergio is there, and I do it with a good heart. But our parents must be more involved. It is not going to be the panacea for everything, the low scores, but it is a start. Possibly private schools, charter schools is a start. I welcome that too, but I still see too many unanswered, let me go ahead and wax statistical, nuisance variables along with unknown variables in pulling this together within 11 months. We do not have all of it together yet. I would give it maybe another year on top of this 11 months.
Mr. Maldonado, about 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I thank you for this opportunity and what you are all doing here. The state of Wyoming has a lot of work to do, and I know every one of us love our children, our grandchildren, and know 7 generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Hearing none. Thank you very much for your testimony. Who comes next? Just please feel free to step up.
Hello. The The button's on? Is it still
It
working?
is
Okay.
on, and if you just give us your name.
My name is Jessica Brown, and I'm a resident here in Laramie County. I have children that I have had in education both here in Wyoming and in previous states. And in my own education, I just first want to say that I am on board with this charter school coming out. In my few short decades I've lived in this life, I've had the opportunity to work with, teach, serve, be around children and those who educate them in various capacities. And I grew up in a place where we had options, we had choices, and I had various friends, various families who had their children at these different places for different reasons. I did grow up in a state where our classroom size was 35 to 40 children. And you want to talk about teacher burnout? That's teacher burnout. So giving teachers an option to not have a classroom size that exceeds what they can handle, what we stipulate here, is my biggest reason for this. I already hear parents complaining, class sizes are too large, class size is this. We are outgrowing our public system, and having the opportunity to grow our public system is a good thing. I've also had options, chances to work with lottery, as I've had my children in a charter school before. And I will say it does keep it fair. It is limited and limiting, but it does open up opportunities that other people wouldn't have or otherwise have. And I'm going to go through with this whole what to think versus how to think is not based on the education system. Yes, we go to school. Yes, we learn things, but the education systems always have things they tell you. This is how history was. This is how science goes. This is how this is. And it changes. Change happens. Whether we get on with it or we help it to move forward is a different thing, but change happens. We think outside of the box more than what we are just told and expected to learn and know within schools. Sorry, I have some notes here on my phone. I'm just going through really quick. So I guess my last thing, I kind of touched on everything. My last thing I just want to say is to quote, "If you build it, they will come." There is a need for this. There is a desire to have this. And it also gives educators an opportunity to choose if they want to live here in Wyoming and keep their pride that they have, that I've noticed among the residents here. They can have options to stay, options more than what they have right now. So that's my comments for the day.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Are there questions? Appreciate the testimony. Thanks. Please come on up.
Good afternoon, Governor, Board. I'm Amber Willoughby. I am a mother of 4 children that have been both public and private schooled. I'm a mom who wants choice. I want to have the opportunity to put my kids where I believe they can grow best. Sometimes it's not the standard, and I want to echo what the lady before me just said, that I've lived in states where we had choice. I grew up in the same state she did, believe it or not. And we had the opportunity to go to public school or charter school. We had school of choice, and it did create more opportunity for some of those kids that did not have the finances or the means to go to maybe a private school. I've been fortunate to place my kids in a private school where they are thriving, and that is mostly based on the class size. My eldest son started in public school. He did well with the curriculum, but the class sizes were extremely difficult for teachers to manage, and the teacher burnout was real, and we did see it. And because my son is highly intellectual and highly energized, it was very difficult for some of those teachers to be able to wrangle some of those kids that were similar to my son in a class size of 25 and 30 kids. In the school that he's in now, in a private school here in Cheyenne, he is thriving. And I cannot express what I think this charter school could do for some of those kids that don't have the opportunity maybe to pay for private school or go to the school of their choice at this point in time based on location, to be able to thrive like my son has been able to thrive. I support the charter school initiative. And I think that it would be behoovant of us to approve these charter schools and give parents some more choice. So those are my comments this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Willoughby. Are there any questions? I have one. Just a quick question. Evidently, you've moved to the state relatively recently. Was your child that experienced the challenges you described, did he experience them here in Wyoming?
It was both in the state of Pennsylvania, where he started in kindergarten, and then we did have some challenges in Wyoming as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Just appreciate it. Thanks. Yes, please. Same routine. You got to press the button. Thank you.
My name is Randy Everett. I'm a surgeon here in Cheyenne. I live here. I've been practicing here for 10 years. I speak on behalf of Choice and specifically on behalf of the Cheyenne Classical School. My wife and I started the first School of Choice in Fort Collins 30 years ago this year. And that same year, I helped write the Charter School Act for the state of Colorado and testified before the State Senate Education Committee, and have subsequently been invited to speak to testify before the U.S. Congress about issues that happen to do with educational choice. First of all, I would like to comment on the remarkable curriculum that was put together by a group of curricular experts, as well as content-specific experts by E.D. Hirsch, who put together what's called a sequence, because it's not a curriculum and it's not off the shelf. There aren't textbooks that come all shiny and clean, but rather it gets put together by teachers. So teachers require a great deal of support. They certainly got it at our school. At Liberty Common School, which is the school that my wife and I started, we have now 30 years of data. The Charter School Act required that all of the initial charter schools in the state of Colorado be very thoroughly evaluated, and that was done at 5 years. And a lot of other parents from other parts of Colorado actually followed our model, and the group of core knowledge schools in Colorado did rather dramatically better over those 5 years than any of the other charter schools or any of the other schools in the state. Our particular school has been in the top 1% of schools in Colorado now for 30 years straight, and there are no other schools that can so claim. It's because of this remarkable thing that happens when you teach children a lot of knowledge. We don't claim to do anything really path-breaking, but by doing well and intentionally, that is to teach a knowledge-based curriculum, to do a good job of teaching math and reading, and then all of the things that go into the curriculum, which is 13 years of world history, 13 years of US history, math, life science, 13 years of life science, 13 years of physical sciences. When parents are offered such an option, many of them do choose it. And we have shown, first of all, and what Hillsdale borrowed basically was the model that we use. It's not a Hillsdale product. It's actually from other sources. In the case of E.D. Hirsch, he was quite a progressive professor from the University of Virginia, not at all conservative. I'm not sure if those were kind of bland remarks made just out of prejudice, but the core knowledge sequence really is remarkable, and I invite you to look at it. I say all of this just to make note of the fact that if you approve at least these two core knowledge schools, you can know that you're going to approve something that has a higher likelihood of succeeding greatly in the very ways that you would like than any other model, as this has been the most successful model used throughout the United States. And so I encourage you to approve it. My last comment would be that educational choice, which has never polled higher than it does currently in the United States, 73%, regardless of party affiliation, want education freedom right now. That's remarkable. And one of the things that
Dr. Everett, I'm going to say you have about 15 seconds or so. So
that's good enough.
okay, thank you. Are there questions? Thank you very much for your testimony. I did have a question if no one else does. I'm unfamiliar with how Colorado funds its schools. Do you have an idea of that?
It's a per pupil funding.
But it's state supported then as well.
It's completely state supported. Initially, charter schools operated on about 32% less money because we were offered no funds whatsoever for a building. So we had to take that out of the same per pupil funding. Now they have changed things and there is a little bit more funding than there had been. School districts are now obliged to share any bond revenues that they generate for the purpose of building buildings on a per pupil basis with other schools. Finally, a simple solution to the issue of special needs demands of whatever kind, and that is just to make sure that if charter schools decide to purchase those services on a per capita basis from their school district, they're allowed to do so. And that's what we do. That makes much more sense for good use of specialists, et cetera.
Thank you. Very good. Mr. Farmer, good to have you with us.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Governor, my name is Brian Farmer, and I'm the Executive Director of Wyoming School Boards Association. I come to you today not to speak in support of nor in opposition to charter applications, but to offer you some things to think about as you make your decisions. Mr. Chairman, I'm in somewhat of a unique position to offer thoughts. As a former school board member, I sat through 3 charter hearings, voting in favor of 2 and in opposition to 1. But Mr. Chairman, in each of those, it was not about, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? In each of those, Mr. Chairman, we viewed it as our obligation to analyze the components of the Wyoming state statute and the rules promulgated by the Department of Education. In other words, the criteria for what it takes for a charter school are listed out, specifically in 21.3307, other places within that same sequence, and then in the Chapter 32 rules. So the question is, did the applicant meet the elements of the requirements in those places? I think the applicant certainly spoke of a compelling educational program. I think they talk about something that is desirable in terms of that program. But there are other elements, and I hope that you've looked through the application to be sure of those. Places that they talk about things like student suspension and expulsion, places where they talk about finance and financial viability, where they talk about facilities and other requirements for the schools. Those are the criteria that the application ought to be evaluated upon, not on whether or not this is a good idea. Mr. Chairman, I would say as we think about this, we're also entering a time where we're in something very brand new. Our charter schools that have existed to date have been a charter of the local district. That means that the local district has, by its authority, granted the right to that school district to exist. So when the Board of State Land Commissioners or the State Land Investment Board, I guess it is that you're sitting as, evaluates this application, we're sort of ambiguous of, is this a charter of the school or is this a charter of the state? And so there's some important consequences of that. And I think Representative Olson talked about some potential need for statutory change. So some of that question is, who bears reporting requirement? Who bears the requirement for insurance? Who bears the requirement for special education services? How are those services to be funded? And so there is sort of an ambiguity. Now, I think there is a possibility of the applicant reaching some agreements on some of those pieces with the local district, but there is certainly a question or an ambiguity in how all of that will play out. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to go into that deeper, but just for the sake of time, there's one last thing I do want to be sure that you're aware of, and that is, to be clear, Wyoming does not fund schools on a per student basis. Our funding formula has 30-some components in that, and the largest part that drives funding of schools is what's known as the prototypical school piece. So the addition of any new school does create new cost to the state of Wyoming. By approving new charters, good thing, bad thing, whatever, we will see an increased cost to the state of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude with that and be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Appreciate that. And I think you do raise some very interesting points to consider. Madam Director, after the conclusion of this, I think coming back to that point of who bears the responsibility for enforcing the charter rules and so on. So Mr. McKenzie, I'm going to say that we'll probably want to ask you a couple of thoughts on that too. So thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Farmer? None. Thank you. Further comments? Further testimony? Mr. Bump, is anyone online? We do have one person approaching.
Mr. Chairman, Governor Gordon, members of the committee. I'm Grady Hutcherson, and I do not have a perfected presentation or comments to share. I wear multiple hats, and I want to bring a couple of things to light, if I may. I wholeheartedly hear and understand the points made about parent choice. And the charter school application before you do that for a very limited number of families in the state of Wyoming. And so we then have to think about, if we're going down that road to provide that opportunity for at least some families in some communities, and we do know, in fact, it will increase the cost of K-12 education in the state of Wyoming. Ultimately, we could move forward with a dual education system where the exact same options and choices would have to exist for every family. I'm so appreciative and excited about the work that the State Board of Education has been doing with the profile of a graduate, as well as and along with your RIDE initiative, Governor Gordon. We really do have a dilemma, because we have to provide, and we want this opportunity for parent choice. I taught in the classroom for 24 years. I'm always amazed at how many people who have never been in a classroom know everything there is to know about educating our children. This system is dealing with human beings. I want parent support with my students, and I want them involved. Every teacher does. We heard that testimony a little bit earlier. I'm very passionate about public education for every single student. And I don't mean to bounce around from point to point to point. However, I wear that hat as a classroom teacher, and I'm regularly disappointed and saddened that their voices are left out of the decision-making process. This perfect dream has been painted of this model school, and I want to get back in the classroom. where every resource, every possibility of what I would want as a teacher for an ideal classroom and a well-rounded education would be provided. That's not what we currently have in Wyoming. I also will just bring out and reiterate a concern that I have. I'm an appointed commissioner by you to serve on the Education Commission of the states, and we have to think about policy choices in legislation. And if we know, just like from Joint Education Interim Committee meeting last week, that there's list after list after list of concerns of how things are going to be handled with these 3 charter schools, Mr. Farmer highlighted most of those, but particularly in terms of figuring out if they're a local education agency, et cetera. I don't know how we can just continue, pardon me, not we. I don't know how you all as a board can just continue to push forward. And I actually would encourage you not to do that until some of these missing components are figured out. And I will stop there, and I certainly and happily would stand for any questions. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions? Don't hear any. Thank you very much, and particularly appreciate the perspective you brought. Thanks. One more round. Is anyone here? Oh, we have somebody approaching.
Hi, Governor Gordon. My name's Franny Bailey. I come before you just as a parent. I have 5 children. And the reason I became interested in this opportunity to have the charter school, the Classical Academy, is because over the last 2 years, my oldest is now in 8th grade, and we've had a great experience in Laramie County School District 1. But over the last few years, I have had several concerns, and hopefully I can just point out a few of those. One is I know a teacher at East who was asked by the counselor to refer to his student by different pronouns than what the student was. And when parent-teacher conferences were coming up, that counselor said, just so you know, the parent is not aware that these pronouns are used at school, so please do not bring this up during parent-teacher conferences. This is concerning to me. Last year, there was a book that was assigned to the 7th grade honors class at Cary Junior High School called Aristotle and Dante Rule the Universe, or something like that. And the theme of the book was 2 boys who were friends, and one had homosexual tendencies, and he convinced his friend by the end of the book to join him in that behavior. And the book is filthy. It is full of vulgar language. It is full of things that a lot of 7th graders don't even know about. And the reason it was brought to my attention was because a parent called me and said, my 7th grader was assigned this book. He told me he's uncomfortable reading it. I don't know what to do. I told the principal, and the principal has told me that the book is on the approved reading list. And after reading the passages, so many of us parents let everyone know we could please get this book out of the classroom. And everyone who read the passages were disgusted, and I'm proud to say that the book was pulled from the classroom within 3 days. But that book had been taught for 4 years. This was the first student with the bravery to approach his parent about it. And finally, in the elementary school, my students have come home from school and said, you know, they're teaching about freedom of speech, but half of the picture on the freedom of speech page is a LGBTQ rally. And so the pictures that they are putting in these books also concern me, that these are subjects being pushed in our public schools. And so I know that the other side says they don't want certain ideologies being pushed. I just want it to be neutral. I don't want these social ideologies being pushed on my students, and they are right here in Laramie County School District 1. So I'm very grateful for this option and this choice for parents if we don't want that indoctrination happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Appreciate your comments and recognize that they're difficult to bring forward. Appreciate very much you stepping forward. Any questions from Ms. Bailey? Hearing none. Any further comment? Any further comment? Mackenzie, just wanted to ask if you could, and I think this is to whatever degree, members of the board, I think some of the questions about what the obligations of this board might be with regard to the charters would be, and then Representative Olson, and don't worry, but if we need you back, we'll call you. So thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm not entirely clear what you would like me to focus on in that regard. And to the extent that you might be interested in having an executive session to answer some of those specific questions. But as of where it stands in terms of obligations, you know, the part of the statute that comes to mind at this time is the provision of 21.3.304B that discusses charter schools in general, and specifically it says that the charter school shall be accountable to its authorizer for the purposes of ensuring compliance with applicable laws and charter provisions, which would be the contract that eventually would be entered into with the charter schools, and the requirements of the state constitution. And so I don't know if that maybe sets the stage for the direction that you want the discussion to head into, but that seemed like the most applicable provision. In essence, it is the authorizer through the contract that will eventually occur with any approved charters. And the authorizer, Slib as the authorizer, will be responsible for ensuring that those contractual provisions are carried through and enforcing the contract in the event that they are not followed through by the charter school. So I hope that at least sets the stage for any further questions.
Yeah, that was exactly where I was hoping you would go. Any questions? Any questions? None? Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, board, I think we've come to the end of the testimony and the presentations. I want to ask each of you if there are any further questions. Secretary Buchanan, anything you'd like to revisit or any questions you have?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Auditor Racina, same. Treasurer? Mr. Superintendent. All right, thank you. So board and Madam Director, and let me just offer the Deputy Superintendent any commentary you would have.
Mr. Chair, thank you for that. I don't have any commentary other than that maybe as a matter of process that we already discussed, we would you would consider each individually in the order that they are received, which was Prairie View from Chugwater, and then the Wyoming Classical Academy from Casper, and then Cheyenne Classical Academy here. But we're here to answer or try to answer questions if you have any.
Perfect, thank you. And I again want to thank the Department of Education for the review and the analysis that you gave to each of these applicants. Madam Director, any comments? I sort of want to kind of think a little bit about process. I think probably we would want to take a bit of a break and then kind of reconvene for process further going forward.
Mr. Chairman, that sounds like a great plan, but just so the board's aware, should you wish to have an executive session, we do have a separate room available for that as well.
Okay. Members of the board, I guess just sort of thinking process-wise, I think if we have a break here, that would be helpful. We come back with some fresh minds and perhaps a little bit of perspective that can be helpful for our further conversations. It would seem to me the recommendation of the deputy superintendent is a good one, take each in order. But let me just ask, do you see a particular need to go to an executive session? I'm really, I guess what I'm thinking about is sort of giving the audience an opportunity to sort of understand what we intend to do here, so. No need. From the auditor, no need. No need. Okay, well, why don't we, I see it is about 3:27. Why don't we take about a 15-minute, 20-minute break here and kind of gather our thoughts. Thank you very much, Representative Olson and Mr. Winters, for your presentation. Thanks for all of those who came to testify. Really, this has been a great process. Our first, and hopefully it's been useful to you as well. Thank you. With that, we'll stand for a break. call, I think I see Superintendent Schrader here. Secretary Buchanan's online. And he is, yeah, there he is. There he is. I don't see, there's the treasurer who's approaching. So without objection, Madam Director, I will call us back in. What I'm envisioning here is kind of a brief synopsis of what we've done, and then board, I have a recommendation that we begin the discussion of each of the candidates by asking Deputy Superintendent Auer just to sort of hit the high points of the review. I know you've all read them. We have the summaries here as well. And then we can move forward in discussion. Does that make sense to you, Mr. Secretary? It does. Madam Auditor, Treasurer, Superintendent. Okay, very good. Thank you very much for your patience. You know, we've had 2 days of testimony. Madam Director, thank you very much for facilitating this happening. We've heard from 3 candidates, and we've had a lot of good discussion. I think there are a couple of issues that have been highlighted that have yet to be resolved and probably cannot within the framework that we have in the legislative piece, but probably must be addressed in our contractual piece. So, Madam Director, I'm probably putting you on the spot, but it does seem to me that today's actions, whatever they may be, probably isn't the end of the story, that there are probably more that we need to do. So let me just give you the opportunity to address that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, depending upon the board's decision with respect to each of the applications, we will then work with the Department of Education to draft the charter contracts, and some of the issues that we've talked about can be addressed in there. Some of them maybe not. Some may be ripe for legislative assistance in the next legislative session, but we will do our best to work with the Department of Education to craft an appropriate charter contract for each applicant based on the decision of the board.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, I got a question about the time period of 5 years. Is that in Wyoming Statute 213309? So that's the maximum that we can't just say pursuant to Wyoming Statute 21 there. Do we have to put the time period in there?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer, I believe the 5 years is set by that statute, the 213309, and then they can, they're reviewed again, or they come back before either the board, or I think they can choose the school district.
So I'm just, I don't want to make a motion that's restrictive. I want to make sure that we have all of the, I guess, flexibility within the motion that the statute allows. And so if the statute says that and it will be reviewed by then, you know, then I guess that's, or yeah, and I guess if it's changed, if you got a subsequent statute or it's been modified, then I'm assuming those modifications would the contract would account for those.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer, I think we are bound to follow the statutes that are in effect on the day that we provide the contract, the charter contract.
All right.
And not to get the cart too far before the horse, but I see in the recommendation, it says grant a charter contract. Is that, and I only mention that at this point so that people can ruminate a bit on whether that's the right language per se. It's sort of, it sort of prejudges that there is a contract in place. There's still, there's still, I guess, negotiations that have to happen.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the drafting of the contract still needs to occur to include all of the requirements moving forward, whether imposed by the board or statute, rule, or otherwise. So
Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Patrick Miller from the Attorney General's Office. It's not uncommon to use language like this, award a contract. In the construction context, we frequently say we're awarding a contract to the successful bidder, even with the understanding that there remains negotiations to take place before we have the actual final contract in front of us.
Okay. Well, when we get to that point, we may call on you again.
Thank you so
So
much.
thank you. And then I know, along with my fellow members of this board, that, our fondest desire is to make sure that we do our job and not frustrate the intent of the legislature. So I just very much appreciate the work that you all have put into this and each of the applicants. With that, Mr. Auer, let's begin with Prairie View Community School.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As is the case with all of the applications, once the applications were received by the Wyoming Department of Education, the team reviewed the applications thoroughly. And as you can see in the handout that we provided, the department analyzed the management and planning. So that included purpose, mission, model, governing board, academic plan, community support, et cetera, stakeholder communications. The second big bucket was resources and operations. So that deals with things like finances, human resources, facilities, school calendar. And in this particular case, I believe that Prairie View Community Schools communicated that they are looking to have an alternative school calendar, which is completely their prerogative, going through the proper process there. And then finally, the third bucket is the educational program. So it talks about educational leadership or school leadership, curriculum instruction, school discipline, the handbooks, those types of things. So it's a very thorough review. And along the way, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as is the case with all three of these, and I won't be repetitive on the others, but I will say generally, the questions and concerns that the department had came up in the conversations that you've had with the applicants, for example, around special education or ambiguities around facilities. And we respect the fact that, for example, in facilities, it's somewhat difficult for a proposed charter school to have very meaningful or consequential conversations with prospective facilities when they don't really have the approval to exist in the first place. So a lot of these things kind of converge. And so our concerns maybe about facilities are simply that, just concerns highlight that these are issues that likely would be resolved in the event that the application was successful. So specifically to Prairie View Community School, it is our recommendation or our view that this application is absolutely complete, and we did make a recommendation for approval of this particular application.
Thank you. Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, one of the issues that was brought up by I guess one of the folks from the Chugwater area was the new school there, and the taxpayers had built that. And my question is if this is there anything in this action, if we do take an affirmative stance on the charter school, that would prevent the charter school organization from, I guess, negotiating for the use of the new school? And right now they're looking at modifying and the old school. But if the district offered it to them, there's nothing that we would do here as far as prohibit anything that would prohibit that transaction to use the new school that's already there, is there?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer, to my knowledge, that, no, there's nothing that would preclude them from continuing those negotiations.
Yeah. Okay, either way. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Madam Auditor, did you have I thought you were reaching for your button. Mr. Superintendent, Mr. Secretary, I think this one had to my memory, had a couple of issues. And I think one the treasurer just alluded to, it is quite possibly existential to the existing school there. And while that could well be a great thing for the charter school to have a brand new facility, it may also be problematic for a parent who may want to have a choice in the community other than the charter school. And I really wanted to congratulate the people for putting together what really seems to be a phenomenal model for a small community. But I did want to note that particular issue. So, Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, and I know we sort of beat this into a pulp at the last meeting, but I think it's important to again state that this school, in addition to all three applications we have before us, assume, and in fact, the budgets do not work if legislature does not tweak the statute in regards to special education funding. So again, I know we talked about that last time, but none of these budgets work per my math unless we get that fix to make sure that special education funding follows the student. So we're just saying that out loud one more time, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Madam Auditor, the other thing that was still, I think, Deputy Superintendent brought this up, that there is a certain amount of chicken and the egg to this, that without an authorization, we don't necessarily get a curriculum, and that's still forthcoming. So any other comments on Prairie View? Mr. Treasurer.
This is, I think, goes to the auditor's point. I had thought that we are basically the designated educational entity, the Slib board is. And I think that's correct, isn't it?
We are the authorizer.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, that's who actually would, we would actually have to apply for the funds that would be the federal funds for special ed. But, and then by contract, we should be able to disperse those. I think that was the chain that I remember. I mean, it was a whole lot of jumping through hoops,
right? But
we could probably figure out a gerrymandered system to get those federal funds.
Madam Auditor and Mackenzie, I think you need to come up. So
yeah,
I'll let Mackenzie say.
Yeah. Okay. This gets more complicated.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify, when we're talking about funding for special education, we're talking about two different sources of funding. One of which is the state funding, and that's the state money that goes to fund special education's services in school districts. And for an ordinary school district, that's the reimbursement that they would receive in the next financial year for their expenses the previous year. I'm, of course, oversimplifying. What you seem to be referring to is the eligibility to receive federal IDEA funds. And that is something that, in theory, Slib could be eligible to apply for, assuming that it could meet the requirements of the IDEA funding, which are perhaps a different context to have that conversation would be useful. But so I just want, what you're speaking about is the federal money. The state money, as the law is currently written, appears to be off the table, at least for those who don't make an agreement with the school district.
And Mackenzie, just to be clear on that, we couldn't just on our own decide that we're going to go start applying for federal funds. We would need to be authorized, I believe, by the legislature.
Mr. Chair, because the legislature has put you in a position to be an LEA for this particular purpose, I think it's implicit authorization to perform that particular function that an LEA serves under the IDEA. So this is the first time I've considered this question, but that does seem to be the case, that SLIB could apply as an LEA for those federal funds.
And does that comport with the other statutes that have education funding being handled primarily by the Department of Education? Or are there some anomalies there?
No, that does comport with it because you would be applying to the Department of Education and to the superintendent for those funds. That's who the application would go to. So the federal funds initially come to the Wyoming Department of Education, and then each LEA has to apply to the Department of Education to receive those funds. And so that's perfectly consistent with that law that you're referring to.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the board, under Wyoming Statute 213302.1, grant a charter contract to Prairie View Community School for a period of 5 years pursuant to Wyoming Statute 213309.
Okay, if you've heard that motion, is there support for it? It's been seconded by the treasurer. Mackenzie, just one more quick question for you, and maybe Mr. Peters as well. Just for my clarification, 213309 presumes that there'll be successful contract negotiations.
That is correct.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, so that means if there are not successful contract negotiations, then this this motion to accept the Department of Education's recommendation does not hold?
Mr. Chair, I think there are a lot of potential outcomes to any issues that come up during the contract negotiations. There are so many possibilities that I don't know that I'm able to really articulate a definitive answer to that question. If there was an issue of accepting the contract, it really depends on what the actual problem is with the negotiations, I guess. The solution to that problem would depend on where the sticking points are in that negotiation. So I can't give a general answer, but it would depend on whether it's something that, that we would be able to accommodate or not accommodate. For example, something that would be required by state law, obviously we wouldn't be able to accommodate that. So if that was something that in the end became a problem for the charter school, then that would perhaps compromise the ability to initiate a charter. If it was something lesser, then there might be some more room for negotiation. It's just impossible to tell without knowing exactly what the points of
Contention
not coming to an agreement would actually look like.
Okay, thank you.
I see the secretary has a discussion. Did you have I thought you unmuted for a second, Mr. Secretary.
No, I did not, but I was wondering about what the proper language for the motion was. And I thought that the auditor put it rather artfully. And so my question though, to the AG's office, where we are as a board in fulfilling our statutory duties, is the language that the auditor offered sufficient for this point in time?
Mr. Chairman, we believe that it is.
So let me put a little different point on it. What I'm concerned about is that without some language that talks about successful contract negotiations, as I know we all presume that will get there. This charter contract exists more or less in perpetuity, which would stymie any, if another charter school wanted to approach, it would stymie their efforts because this would be unresolved.
Mr. Chairman, I suppose you could put some language in there where if if the Office of State Lands or in the Department of Education, we're not able to come to an agreement and to execute a contract, that would need to come back before the board in order to address the issue. And we could also put a time limit on this authorization so that they would be authorized to engage in contract negotiations for a period of, say, 4 to 6 months, whatever the board's pleasure is. And then if negotiations are unsuccessful during that time period, we could bring the issue back to the board for some kind of resolution, whether that's terminating the motion, whatever it would be that would pass today, or overruling the agency's objections and then moving forward.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Peters.
Just on the time period there of 5 years, is that 5 years from the signing of the date of the contract, 5 years from today, or 5 years from the time that the school opens?
Mr. Chair, as I read the statute, it would be operating for a period of 5 years.
So it's 5 years from the date that school opens?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Good to know those statutes, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to tweak my motion if you clarify. That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you.
And Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I could have the auditor repeat the motion, I apologize. And with the question, the statutory citation she mentioned, I think was under Article 302, and then you mentioned 309. Do we need to point to a particular statute? Does that limit anything, or is more general language, something along the lines of all statutory requirements, we would approve on the condition of meeting all statutory requirements? That's my only question as far as clarification. Otherwise, I'm good with the motion.
So while Mr. Peters is working diligently, let me read her motion, if I remember correctly. I think it's pretty much verbatim as was here. The Wyoming Department of Education recommends that the board, as an authorizer of charter schools under Wyoming Statute 21-302, 1, grant a charter contract to Prairie View Community School for a period of 5 years pursuant to Wyoming Statute 21-3-309.
That answers my question perfectly. I missed the 309, so I think that's good.
Yeah, we can just say the board authorizes. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if it's the pleasure of the board, I can propose a motion and then feel free to adjust as you see fit. So,
Yeah, okay, so you'll look at tweaking your motion. Okay.
Yes,
thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
all right, so picking up where the Department of Education's recommendations leave off at the close of 21-3-309 there, period. The board further authorizes the Office of State Lands and the Department of Education to engage in negotiations with the applicant for a final charter contract, period. If negotiations are unsuccessful, the office shall bring the matter back to the board at the point negotiations fail. This authorization shall be valid for a period of 6 months.
Mr. Chairman, does it need a time limit?
Not necessarily.
They can't open if they don't have a contract. I mean, there's some self-built motivation to that, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I would amend my motion as to, keep everything I stated, and the board would further authorize that the Office of State Lands and Investments and the Department of Education enter into negotiations with the applicant to execute a final charter contract. And and I apologize, I didn't catch all of that, if the negotiations are unsuccessful, to bring the matter back before the board.
Within a period of 6 months.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer, that's actually the part I don't necessarily think we need.
Yeah.
If things aren't working out, I have confidence that we'll
Yeah.
hear about it.
I'll second that.
Okay, so the motion has been tweaked and approved by the seconder, so the motion is before us now. Is there any discussion? Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just
Madam.
a fine, maybe a thank you and a compliment to my colleagues on the board, but particularly to Department of Education and Office of State Lands and Investments. I think it's not a secret that this process is certainly, I don't want to say outside our lane, but we're all on a learning curve here. And so we appreciate patience from the applicants, and also the time put in by OSLI and Department of Education, who are very, very busy already. And so I really appreciate their dedication to this process, which that none of us knew about 4 years ago. So I appreciate that. It's been exciting to learn about, but recognizing that this is new to us all. So asking for some grace, I think, for all of us.
Thank you,
We'll
Madam.
throw in the legal staff there too. We'll throw them under the bus.
Thank you, Auditor and Treasurer. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 That motion carries. Deputy Superintendent. We now proceed to the Wyoming Classical Academy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As mentioned earlier, and it applies to this application as well, this particular proposed charter school would be in Casper, Wyoming, and the Department of Education reviewed this application under the three buckets, major buckets as described earlier, those being management and planning, resources and operation, educational program. After thorough review, the Department of Education found the application to be complete, and as is customary by norms of this board, we made a recommendation for approval.
Thank you. So members of the board, what are your, I do note that we've had some letters that have come in on this particular, but that's all part of the public record. But other than that, what is the pleasure of the board?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I guess I would move that the board, as an authorizer of charter schools under Wyoming Statute 21-3-302.1, grant a charter contract to the Wyoming Classical Academy for a period of 5 years pursuant to Wyoming Statute 21-3-309, and further authorize the Office of State Lands and Investments and the Department of Education to enter into contract negotiations for the let's see, what do we use, the ultimate?
Mr. Chairman,
for that.
I would be happy to read
Sure.
it in full as drafted by Mr. Miller, if
Sure.
that would be helpful. That the board, as an authorizer of charter schools under Wyoming Statute 21-3-302.1, grant a charter contract to Wyoming Classical Academy for a period of 5 years pursuant to Wyoming Statute 21-3-309. That the board further authorizes the Office of State Lands and the Department of Education to engage in negotiations with the applicant for a final charter contract. If negotiations are unsuccessful, the office shall bring the matter back to the board at the point negotiations fail.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. Okay, so that
I'd second that.
motion has been made and seconded, made by the treasurer, seconded by the Secretary of State. Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion? I will just note, there has been some testimony with regard to this particular school that really was focused a bit more on the policy challenge that the state has in funding schools than it was, and I'm not saying in its entirety, but a bit more in places on the challenge that the state has in funding its schools than it has on the educational opportunities. Now, it's clear to me the educational opportunities are going to be provided, but these charters, I hope, are not an attempt to sort of somehow sidestep the obligations that the state has to fund education. So, my comment. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 That motion carries. And next, we move to Cheyenne Classical Academy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Cheyenne Classical Academy is the third and final proposed charter school application before you today. This proposed charter school was reviewed by the Department of Education under the three buckets that I mentioned earlier. But for the record, they are management and planning, resources and operations, educational program. After thorough review by the Department of Education, we found the application to be complete and ready for your consideration, and we did recommend approval.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent. What is the pleasure of the board? They're all pointing at you,
Okay, Mr.
Superintendent.
Chairman, I'll be glad to make a motion, although I might need the director's fill in the blanks. But I make a motion that the board accepts the Wyoming Department of Education's recommendation that the board is an authorizer of charter schools under Wyoming Statute 21-3-302.1, grant a charter contract to Cheyenne Classical Academy for a period of 5 years pursuant to Wyoming Statute 21-3-309, and Director Scoggin will fill in the blanks.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Superintendent, the board further authorizes the Office of State Lands and the Department of Education to engage in negotiations with the applicant for a final charter contract. If negotiations are unsuccessful, the office shall bring the matter back to the board at the point negotiations fail.
What she said.
What she said, yes, sir.
Is there support for the superintendent's motion? It's been seconded by the treasurer. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Not wanting to miss an opportunity. I just want to compliment the people for putting together a very complete and compelling discussion of this. So thank you very, very much for being here today. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 That motion carries. Madam Director, you know, in this conversation, there has been some conversation about what this will or will not do to school districts. And I guess, members of the board, I wouldn't mind with the passage of time that we have the opportunity to hear from districts what their experience has been as these charters have come into place. I think it would be informative. Sometimes the devil we don't know is really scary, and we worry about that. My view is once we've launched these, that there will be more experience and more opportunity, and perhaps this is a great model. So if you all think that's appropriate, I don't know, Mr. Peters, if there's a motion that we can make to that effect. I don't know if we have any authority to compel, but I really would love to hear from school districts at a later date.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You certainly have the authority to direct the office to solicit comment from the districts that are affected by the charters granted today, and then bring back a report. And you don't necessarily have to set a time frame for that, but you certainly could.
Okay. What do you think, board members? We don't have to have a motion to that effect, but okay. Well, with that, Madam Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, certainly OSLI would be happy to solicit those comments once things get rolling here. Yes, that concludes the agenda for today's special meeting of the State Loan and Investment Board.
Well, congratulations to the applicants. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for sitting with us for several hours. To my fellow board members, thanks for the adventure in doing this. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.